Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen right now so that I can move over to the run sheet. Okay, without further ado, welcome to Beyond Zero Emissions October discussion group. I'm really excited. We've got a great lineup of speakers tonight, including Nicki Ison from the World Wildlife Fund Australia, Simon Currie from Energy Estate, and Michael Lord from Beyond Zero Emissions. Before I hand over the microphone, I'd just like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the unceded lands on which I'm sitting and which I work and live. And where I am, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. And I'd like to extend my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and encourage you to do the same in the chat box because it's lovely to see where you're all coming from tonight. A little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, so we will distribute it after in the next couple of days. We'll have a follow-up email. We'll send around the recording and any resources. And also that we'll have a Q&A session later in the hour. So please submit your questions via the Q&A box. And I really encourage you to discuss and chat what we're talking about in the chat box. We'll do our best to answer them, but sometimes we're a little short on time. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Michael Lord, who is our lead researcher at Beyond Zero Emissions. Not only was Michael lead author of the Million Jobs Plan, but he also led BZE reports, including Electrifying Industry, Rethinking Cement, the 10 Gigawatt Vision. And Mike will be presenting on the economics behind the Million Jobs Plan and how this plan will create a better economy now and in a post-COVID Australia. So Michael, without further ado, take it away.
Thanks for that, Im. And I'm in Ballarat on the lands of the Wadawurrung people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So thank you all for joining tonight. So just a bit of context, as Im said, I'm going to talk about some economic analysis we had done in the Million Jobs Plan, but to remind people that the Million Jobs Plan was something we wrote in the context of course, COVID-19 and Australia's first recession for about 3 decades and hundreds of thousands of Australians becoming unemployed. What we showed in the Million Jobs Plan was that we could create well over 1 million jobs by really getting behind zero emissions technologies. We counted 1.8 million jobs. We counted jobs as job years, so that's one job for 1 year within a 5-year period. So starting this financial year and for the 4 subsequent financial years. Often when people think about jobs and the economy related to renewable energy, they think to zero emissions technologies, they think of renewable energy. And it's true, we did find a lot of jobs in that sector, about 200,000 jobs. A lot of those would be short-term construction jobs. But that's actually really just the tip of the iceberg in the jobs we could create by really getting behind zero carbon transition. And a lot of the real role of renewable energy is that it underpins employment potential in other sectors like the building sector, the transport sector, and the manufacturing sector, mining. Just to choose one example, we've got 3 aluminium smelters on the mainland of Australia. They're all struggling financially. Their owners have hinted that they may be due to close in the next few years. The future for those smelters is to use low-cost renewable energy, retaining those jobs within Australia. So renewable energy really underpins a lot of the jobs that we found. Another thing to say is that our plan creates jobs quickly. So we only looked at a 5-year period. So the jobs had to be created within those 5 years. And many of the jobs, for example, in land restoration, could be created pretty much straight away. And there's plenty to do in restoring Australia's ecosystems, particularly after the bushfires at the start of the year. and in making the land more resilient to bushfires. Another important point is that this plan would be driven by private sector investment, really requiring only modest public money, which acts as the sort of catalyst or the lever to access this private sector investment. And government's other role is just to create the setting for this investment. And the Million Jobs Plan really chimed with what's become quite mainstream political and economic discussion throughout the world. So this chart shows one statistic that's been repeated quite often, which shows that per $10 million, investment in renewable technologies and energy efficiency creates several times more jobs than investment in fossil fuels. So we've seen a lot of statements like this from very mainstream bodies like the International Energy Agency and the International Monetary Fund, that we need to put clean energy at the heart of stimulus and the green economy, the green recovery. So the message for Australia is that tackling climate change, reducing emissions, is not about avoiding cost or pain, avoiding harm. It's really about seizing an opportunity for Australia. And at the same time, we get to tackle climate change, which is fantastic. So that's what the Million Jobs Plan said. But we wanted to get some very sort of mainstream standard financial analysis done of this work to show what an economist would make of it. So we commissioned a guy called Chris Murphy, who's a former Treasury economist and one of Australia's foremost economic experts. He uses a model that he's created over several decades, which is similar to the models used by the Australian Treasury and the Reserve Bank. And what he did was he looked forward 20 years and compared a baseline scenario where the Million Jobs Plan wasn't implemented to a scenario where the Million Jobs Plan was implemented. And it's important to say that he didn't look at the whole plan. He looked at about 1 million of those 1.8 million jobs that we found. So he only really considered 55% of our plan. And what he found was that, as he described, Australia's economy faces three challenges: one, unemployment; two, ballooning public debt; and three, flatlining living standards. And he found that the Million Jobs Plan tackles all of these problems. Chris Murphy said that the modelling shows, his modelling, that the plan contributes to a stronger economic recovery and delivers results almost immediately and benefits that persist for many years. And I'd just like to drill down into those findings quickly with three impacts of the Million Jobs Plan. The first is on growth. So he found that compared to the baseline, the Million Jobs Plan would have an immediate impact of about a 2% boost to GDP, and that this benefit would persist at least until 2040 with a 1% addition to GDP. So that represents that 1%, about $15 billion in economic activity. And it would also tackle two of the long-term sort of structural problems that have been raised for several years with the Australian economy. One is low productivity growth, and two is low wage growth. We're going to see a bit more about those as well. As I said, the Million Jobs Plan achieves its effect largely through private investment. And Chris's modelling found that compared to the baseline, there'd be an additional $25 billion per year in private sector investment. And not only would this help to drive improvements in productivity, but it would help to reduce the public debt more quickly. Remembering that public debt, at the time the modelling was done, had grown by about 200 billion Australian dollars, and it's probably more now. We might hear more about that in the budget tomorrow. One of the other positive impacts was the impact on real wages. So as I said, wages haven't been growing, real wages, for at least a decade in Australia. Because of COVID, they're not expected to grow reach even pre-COVID levels until 2026. But with the Million Jobs Plan, we see an additional boost straight away of about 1% to real wages, and by 2036 of about 2%. So that 2% would represent about $1,350 in after-tax wages. So the Million Jobs Plan is all about jobs. The modelling also found that the plan would indeed boost jobs, and we would have 124,000 more jobs by the end of the next financial year if we implement the Million Jobs Plan. So the modelling counted jobs in a slightly different way. It counted ongoing jobs, permanent jobs. Not only that, but unemployment would come down more quickly with the Million Jobs Plan, and it would produce jobs throughout Australia. 70% of them would be in regional areas. So we had quite a bit of good coverage for the economic analysis. This was from The Australian, not necessarily known for its positive stories about renewable energy, but this was a positive story. Spurred, I think, from the fact that we had one of Australia's most trusted economic advisors producing the modelling. And it's also meant that we've been able to capture the attention of the Prime Minister's office and the federal government, because this is the kind of language they understand, increased growth, increased wages, and more jobs quickly. So thank you all for listening. You can download a copy of both the Million Jobs Plan and a summary of the economic analysis at millionjobs.org.au. Back to you, Em.
Thanks so much, Michael. That's fantastic. And as I said, we'll be sharing the resources for everyone who registered for this event in the next couple of days. So we'll be sure to send that through. So our next speaker is Simon Currie. Simon is a principal and co-founder of Energy Estate. Energy Estate is an energy advisory and accelerator firm. Energy Estate's track record includes the Bowman Solar Farm in New South Wales and Rods Bay Solar Farm in Queensland. Simon is leading the team developing Central Queensland Power, a 2 gigawatt integrated renewable energy project located close to Gladstone. Simon is recognised as a leader and a pioneer in the transformation of the energy sector and integrating renewables with other industries. Simon is passionate about digitisation of the industry, new and emerging technologies, and the potential for creating jobs and economic growth through this approach. Simon will be presenting now on the financial case for renewable manufacturing using the Newcastle and Hunter Valley, and Gladstone as examples. Over to you, Simon.
Great, thanks, Imogen. So it's been a real pleasure to be heavily involved in the Million Jobs Plan. As Energy Estate, together with our partners, we submitted, I think, around 15 plus projects into the original list of all different shapes and size. Let's just step back for a second. In 2008, 2009, the largest solar PV manufacturers in the world were not dominated by China. You had Q-Cells, you had First Solar, who's still kicking around, you had Sharp. They were all very major players. What happened was that the green stimulus packages which followed the GFC, China, through a range of soft loans, really turbocharged their domestic solar industry to achieve a scale that no one else had achieved. They didn't come from a huge manufacturing base at the time, but they immediately achieved scale, and by 2012, there were a couple of hangers-on, but the volume of the industry had completely and absolutely shifted to China. I had the pleasure of going around Yingli's and Suntec's factory, my first ever visit to China in 2011. I was there at the same time as an American who worked for one of the major American companies. He went back home going, we're all doomed. I went back to London at the time going, I can't believe this pace at which they're prepared to move and the amount of government support that they're getting, including not just money, but fast tracking of planning. So we fast forward 12 years and we're in that same place again. We need to actually decide whether we want to play. The difference now is, we had 10 years where fossil fuels continued to dominate the investment climate in many markets. But when life has very much changed now. So what we have today, when I look at Gladstone and Newcastle Hunter Valley, as I was just actually saying to everyone, I've just driven 850 kilometres over the last 2 days. I haven't seen a single solar farm, a single wind farm, but I've seen 25 some closed coal mines. So my mind is pretty sharply focused this evening. We have this opportunity with the Hunter Valley, Newcastle and Gladstone to remake it and to remake it differently. And the reason I'm so confident about that is because we are starting so many supply chains from scratch. We're not going to overnight be able to effectively use Rods Bay or another Neoen project to anchor solar manufacturing in Australia. But what we will be able to do is to anchor the new wave of renewable energy manufacturing, in particular around green hydrogen, and actually compete globally. So a company which I'd like to focus on, and someone who is in the the fast track shortlist, is Lavo and the Providence Asset Group. Now, you may well have heard about their proposals to accelerate the development of the metal hydride technology that's coming out of UNSW. This is world-leading Australian technology that the developers now have committed to manufacturing in Australia. Now, I have heard already resounding chorus of voices saying, it'll never happen. You'll never be big enough. You'll never be fast enough. And we will prove them wrong. And the reason we'll prove them wrong is we will base it in a place like Newcastle and Hunter Valley with existing manufacturers who already manufacture things such as large-scale production of vehicles. Of course, everyone said Tesla was going to fail completely, and that was only 18 months ago that everyone was still said he'll never make it. What we're going to do is we're going to attract the chosen electrolyzer manufacturers and the chosen fuel cell manufacturers from Europe, who currently, they have no scale. My partner went round the Siemens electrolyzer manufacturing in Erlangen in January. He walked in there expecting to be wowed. It was a shed, and I think they had just exported their 14th electrolyzer unit. And that's why we have this opportunity, which will never come round again. That's why, from a fiscal point of view, and to effectively put our money where our mouth is in terms of the green hydrogen, we have this opportunity to back our own projects and own technology such as Lavo, and to do it in a way that we don't need to sit there and say, oh, but we're a high labour cost market, we can't do it. This is not labour cost, which effectively is a component of advanced manufacturing. You're looking at 25 to 40% of the costs of advanced manufacturing being in the energy costs. We are now well on our way to driving down our energy costs because of people like Neoen. Everyone saw the price that they put into the ACT, and they've just signed another PPA with CleanCo today. There was many other developers, people like RES, people like Energy Estate, capable of delivering very, very low cost energy for these new manufacturing facilities. What we need to help is fast tracking things such as the special activation precincts, which have been set up in New South Wales with 40 to 60 day planning periods. And everyone says, in New South Wales? Now, why is that important? Because that drives down your costs of establishment. You're able to hit your market so much more quickly. And that's what China did in 2009. Plants which would have been built in Europe were going to take 2 years to get through the planning process. In China, that was 4 months, if that. It was a bit like being in Texas, and they were able to just start construction and be first out. We have to when we look at doing this, we can't sit there going, it's going to take us 3 to 4 years to get our plants that we all so desperately want off the ground in order to be competitive. So that's really touching on Lavo. The other thing which is worth looking at and considering as to why I believe that we can achieve this from a financial perspective, have a look at Gladstone. Gladstone is one of the very few deep water industrial ports in the world with the ample land to now transition from coal. It's already transitioned to CSG to LNG, and now it can transition to build upon the strengths of Boyne and Yarwun and Quail and the existing other manufacturing that goes on there, to incorporate at a low cost. The land is already there, the facilities are there, the workforce is there, you have a social license for manufacturing. All of those things cost you very significantly if you don't have them, which is why it's so important that as we do this, we don't just try and do greenfield manufacturing in places where there has not been greenfield manufacturing before, particularly if it's anything like heavy industry. So for example, switching back to Lavo, one of the things that Lavo wants to bring in is the first titanium furnace. We have no titanium furnaces in Australia, notwithstanding the fact we are a major producer of titanium. We need the titanium furnace to manufacture the metal hydride. Now, whether we do a titanium furnace in Gladstone, or we do it in Newcastle, or we choose somewhere which there is a social license for high temperature, such as Port Kembla, where you've got the steelworks. Those are factors which enable us to move quickly and to enable us to have low-cost manufacturing options. What are we missing? Well, other than Victoria and what Victoria did with VRET, we're missing any commitment by states or the private sector for mandates. We don't really have a history of mandates outside the federal government, what the federal government's doing with frigates in terms of committing to locally made steel, locally manufactured frigates and other products in the Defence Force. But generally, we haven't been good at mandating. That's where we now need to step up and mandate in order to get the scale quickly. People aren't looking for massive federal underwrites or handouts, but if effectively state and federal governments start mandating, but it's more than that. The private sector has to step up too. We haven't seen the private sector commit in many situations. The Bowman Solar Farm was driven by the behaviour of Westpac, where Westpac wanted mandates around Indigenous workforce, socially deprived workforce, as well as local content. They didn't go as far, they weren't as adventurous as what ACT or Victoria was, but that's what we're really looking for now in terms of effectively driving more and more developers to commit. For me, one of the, and I talk a lot about this, I find it quite depressing that the steel for transmission towers, of which I also saw a lot over the last few days, we currently have not been using domestic steel because we haven't invested in a very small amount to have the right cutting tools and cutting facilities in Australia. That's changing, but as part of our regulatory asset test, we need to do things like say, it's actually critical for us now to incorporate those element of local content. Now, at the same time, we can't be making unsustainable, which is why what we've got to focus on is scale rather than subscale facilities, which will never be domestically or internationally competitive, which is why we need to pull together behind people like Energy Renaissance, Lavo, to actually end up with world-class scale manufacturing facilities rather than a wind turbine tower manufacturer who's full with half a wind farm. That is not a manufacturing strategy. That is a cop-out. So hopefully those messages, came through. I'm fully committed, as we all are at Energy Estate. Of course, we have Simon Corbell as part of our team, so he never, as Nicki and the BZE team know, he would never let us stray from this. But we're really, really confident that now is the time, and with the work that BZE has put in, together with the opportunity in particular the Hunter and Newcastle and Gladstone, that we can achieve these goals. Imogen, that's it for me.
Thank you, Simon. That was excellent. It's really fantastic and inspiring to hear it on a regional level. So thank you. Our next speaker is Nicki Ison. Nicki is an entrepreneur, policy analyst, researcher, strategist, and commentator. Nicki has specialist knowledge of Australia's energy system, community renewable energy, and social movements. Nicki has a Bachelor of Engineering with first class honours and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of New South Wales. Nicki Ison is the founder of the Community Power Agency and Research Associate at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology in Sydney. Nicki is currently the Energy Transition Manager at World Wildlife Fund Australia, and Nicki will be talking about renewable energy industrial precincts tonight and why they are essential in unlocking Australia as a renewable export powerhouse. Thank you for joining us, Nicki. Please take it away.
Thanks so much, Imogen. Great to be with you. Thank you, BZE, for hosting this great event. Lovely to be with you all. I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and that we have much to learn. I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that Michael and I have been working on across our two organisations. WWF Australia, like BZE, has been running a renewable recovery campaign to help drive clean stimulus. And one idea that we've been working on together that also overlaps with Energy Estates work and conversations we've been having with them is this idea of a renewable energy industrial precinct. So what is that? The idea of a precinct is that it is a cluster of manufacturers in a geographical location powered by 100% renewable energy. And these are either co-located with renewable energy generations in renewable energy zones, or connected to those renewable energy zones through high voltage transmission lines. They also have access to clean heat and renewable hydrogen production and infrastructure. So we think these are important because for a number of reasons, because they really are essentially a planning and policy tool and a program tool for governments and industry to work together to unlock the promise of Australia becoming a renewable powerhouse and unlock the short-term opportunity of creating good, clean jobs as we emerge from the COVID-19 crisis. So I thought I'd do two things in my talk. One, talk about why renewable energy industrial precincts, and then talk to, well, what would they entail and what are some of the first steps that we might want to see. So the first is these things would help decarbonise Australia's industry. So if you look at total final energy consumption in Australia, 44% of energy consumption is from industry. And that is not just electricity, that's gas, oil, coal, primary energy. And I think one of the things that I would really challenge you, we've talked a lot for the last decade about the idea of 100% renewables, but really that is just decarbonising the electricity sector. We need to be talking about decarbonising the whole economy, and the biggest part of the economy is our energy use. So industry. The second thing is obviously there's a lot of conversation about gas at the moment. If you look at the breakdown of gas use in manufacturing, you see that there's just a handful of large users that use the bulk of our gas. Metals and alumina refining, basic chemical and ammonia production, and metals and aluminium. Sorry, one of them. So they use the majority of our gas, though recently there was a useful finding over the weekend that actually gas exports use more gas than these manufacturers. But nevertheless, if we are going to be serious about a renewable recovery, not a gas-led recovery, we need to be looking at how do we support these large gas users to move away over the next 10 to 20 years from gas to renewable alternatives such as renewable hydrogen. And a renewable energy industrial precinct can help do so. The second is, we want to see, there's a lot of talk around hydrogen and the potential of hydrogen for Australia, both domestically and from an export perspective. Well, one of the things that we can do with renewable hydrogen is decarbonise the existing hydrogen industry. What isn't widely known is that actually the global hydrogen industry accounts for about 1% of global carbon pollution. It is used to make ammonia, to refine oil, and a range of other chemical commodities and inputs into the chemical industry. So what we see is that these renewable energy industrial precincts could use ammonia and hydrogen production or hydrogen users that already exist and help them to decarbonise, and those manufacturers can then be anchor customers for these industrial precincts. Companies like Yarra Pilbara, one of the largest fertiliser companies in the world, which is based up on the Northwest Shelf. You've got Incitec Pivot and Queensland Chemicals, Queensland Nitrates up in and around Gladstone, and a number of Orica in Newcastle. And these are all the types of users where you could create scale easily and quickly to help bring renewable hydrogen down the cost curve. The second is, we hear a lot about Australia's renewable advantage, and it is real. We have some of the best solar and wind resources in the world, and we have abundant land, and we can use that, but only if we act soon. So we at WWF are running a campaign. My job is to help accelerate Australia to become the world's leading renewable export nation by 2030. That's fun and exciting and just a small task, and we're pleased to be working with BZE and many other organisations on that mission. But we talk about 6 different types of renewable exports. Renewable hydrogen, I've just mentioned, direct electricity transfer, like the Sun Cable project, solar powered products or renewable powered products, which is really the embodied renewables in steel, alumina, aluminium, other metals and advanced manufacturing. Australian expertise, components and the recycling of components for making clean energy technologies, and then software and services. Now, for about 4 of these renewable export types, hydrogen products, expertise and components and recyclings, it makes sense to geographically co-locate them in a place where you can actually have access to an export port. So let's use our existing heavy industry hubs and transform them into renewable export hubs. We talk a lot, I mentioned before that 100% renewables is not enough. We're talking about going to 700% renewables, and the renewable energy industrial precinct would help us get there. It would also help us capture the huge opportunity that we have in processing critical minerals. This is a nice table that Michael produced in his previous role, and I'm just using it. But we have so many of the minerals that we need to both create renewable commodities such as batteries, but also we have some of the, we are one of the largest, if not the largest exporter of iron ore, which accounts for 6 to 7% of global emissions. So helping to decarbonise steel manufacturing, steel making is a huge economic opportunity for Australia. So I've talked a little bit around what a renewable energy industrial precinct is, but what really does make it up? The first is it needs to have a guaranteed, reliable supply of renewables at a low price. That then needs to be backed up by local storage and flexible demand programs. Really interested in some of the work that is being done looking at aluminium smeltings and the use of potline technologies to turn aluminium smelters into massive batteries, where they can ramp up and down by 20%, give or take. And that could be, a huge stabilizing force for these precincts and for the grid more broadly. You'll need critical infrastructure, transmission connection, hydrogen production, pipelines, and probably a shared industrial heating network. Water, waste and recycling facilities. This is an opportunity to establish an industrial ecology. So looking at what the waste streams are from one manufacturing zone type that can be used as a feedstock for the next, and look at ways that we can create more of a circular economy. And then, of course, you'll need connections to port, rail and road logistics, and places like Newcastle are just perfect for that. Deepwater Port, good rail infrastructure. The Hunter Valley's one of their largest industries actually is a road logistics industry. Then, of course, skilled labour and training programs are going to be needed in each of these precinct areas to really make sure that there are the people there who are able to do that job of working, cleaning up our existing heavy industry, and then innovating and creating these new technologies and implementing these technologies at scale, as Simon Currie mentioned. Will, as Simon mentioned, need streamlined planning and approvals processes, and there will need to be some degree of financial incentive, at least for the infrastructure required. And one of the great things is we can get on with creating this infrastructure now, because there are already some anchor customers starting to emerge. Where might they be? Well, Michael and I, put our heads together and came up with this list, but I thought I would share a map of the different types of renewable exports that we're starting to see around the country. But certainly wherever there's a deep water port and a heavy industry base already, Gladstone, Newcastle, Port Kembla. We've been doing quite a bit of work down in Tasmania and looking at the opportunity of Bell Bay. Bell Bay, you could argue, is almost already a renewable industrial precinct, and it's about how do you then make it one for the 21st century, not just the 20th century. Then, of course, over in Kwinana in Western Australia, there's a huge amount of work going on, and the Western Australian government, I would say, is doing some of the most interesting strategic work in attracting clean energy industries to that part of the world. And then there's some opportunities further north, and then obviously in South Australia, and it'll be interesting to see what Sanjeev Gupta does with Whyalla. I think one of the things that we are focusing on at WWF is the need to grow markets for the products created in renewable energy industrial precincts. If we can demonstrate that there is a demand for green steel, for green ammonia, for green hydrogen, and other renewable powered products, then it is easier to justify the investment in the infrastructure and the upgrades to plant required. So we're doing some work through the Business Renewables Centre. My colleague Monica Richter is leading some work around creating a buyers group for decarbonised materials in the construction industry. And then I've been doing some work looking at how do we create some early demand for renewable hydrogen. I'll finish up by saying this is just part of a broader program, but we're really excited to be working with the BZE around this, both in the Hunter on the renewable energy industrial precincts idea, and more broadly, because I want to acknowledge that BZE was really the first organisation out there saying that Australia could become a renewable export powerhouse with its renewable superpower report. So thanks, Michael, and to the team, and thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Nicki. That was also fantastic. It's great to hear about it on that regional level, and thank you for providing such clear feedback. I'll just quickly now ask that all the speakers turn on their cameras, but make sure to remain mute because we're going to move to Q&A session. So I'm just going to jump. Thank you. I can see you all moving through. Excellent. Okay. So we have a range of questions. I'm just going to start reading through them. The first one is for Michael Lord. It's from David Strang. And the question is, do you see private investment playing a role in building improvements, or will this have to be government funded?
Yeah, thanks for that question, David. So I mentioned in my presentation that public funding is important, but it doesn't fund the bulk of this. The bulk of it comes from private sector investment. So to choose an example from our report, we talk about building 90 gigawatts of renewable energy in the next 5 years. That's a hell of a lot, but there is last time I looked, 160 gigawatts of renewable energy already in the planning stage, and about a quarter of that has planning permission. So all of that is the private sector willing to build and pay for wind, solar, and batteries. So Simon represents one of those companies, Energy Estate. Simon isn't asking for public funding to build solar and wind farms. Private sector funding is willing to do it. There are sectors where we will need some public funding to get things going. off the top of my head, we talk about cycling infrastructure. So cycling infrastructure pays back enormously, but it does need public funding to get it going. But in general, the role for governments is to create the setting and the environment so private investors have the confidence that Australia is a place to invest in.
Can I just add a little onto that? It's very interesting in a post-COVID world to see how people are starting to divert funding, and particularly people who traditionally have invested in commercial real estate. And so there's an increasing focus on the precincts, and that's coupled with there's a huge number of investors already in Australia, whether they are the NGs, Enel, Internet Globals, Transgrid, Gemini, all looking to finance the infrastructure in precincts. Now, whether that's the water infrastructure, the electricity infrastructure, you have great local companies like Wagner's, who did that incredible job with what they did with Toowoomba Airport. They're the type of companies who are looking at coming into these precincts. So these precincts don't need to be all fully funded by effectively a handout from state government or arena or federal. If you properly tender them out, and I'm very confident that there will be people will be also having the field of dreams. They won't require the entire all the tenants to be there before they commit. And we're already seeing that in places like Gladstone, where people are coming in and say, I'll fund the development of that precinct because I'm confident it's in the right place to attract the type of tenants I'd like to see.
If I can jump in and just say a couple of things. So I agree. I think there's huge, there's no shortage of money in the private sector willing to invest in this. What there might be is a shortage of a business case. And so that's where the mandates that Simon was talking about, the demand and market creation that I was talking about is absolutely essential. But I will say that other governments around the world are pouring big amounts of cash into this. And so, if we do want to be seen as an attractive place for global investment, but not just financial investment, but companies looking for places to locate in, in de-risked, future-proofed, zero carbon environments, then, Australia is lagging behind other countries such as the, EU, Germany, France, UK and South Korea being one of our critical trading partners. In fact, I can give you a sneak peek of some analysis that we're going to release tomorrow, which is if you look at our federal stimulus, clean stimulus announced over the last month or so, we would say there's about $99 per person in Australia committed. Whereas if you look at the UK, it's about $500 per person committed in clean stimulus. So, we are lagging behind.
And Nicki, given your job to make Australia the renewable energy powerhouse of the world, you probably look with envy on something like the German stimulus, where I think, what did they put? Was it 10 billion euros just into clean hydrogen?
Yeah, I think it was 9 billion, but exactly, they're really, seeing the future and unlocking it. And I have to say, I'm feeling optimistic. It doesn't feel like we're not seeing the future here in Australia. It's about whether we can start to match the scale. And, I agree with Simon and yourself, Michael. It doesn't have to be all in terms of funding. It can be out through other programs and policies as well. But to be honest, I think funding is easier for the governments we have at the moment than some of the policies we might need.
Excellent. Thank you, all panelists. Okay, our next question is from Peter Wilson, and it's also directed towards Michael Ward, but that was fantastic. It's great to get you all responding. The question is, I was wondering what the baseline is in the economic analysis. Is it going along with other government COVID rebuild projects, or does it compare against other government proposed projects, for example, more roads?
It compared, I believe, to any announced public investment and projects. So that's what it compared to. It was actually quite a favourable look at the future. So even the baseline itself was a future where Australia bounces back very quickly from recession, jobs are created, real wages go up and productivity goes up, which I actually felt was quite a rosy view of the baseline future, given that Australia has been struggling with some of those underlying metrics like productivity for quite a while. But to me, that gave me confidence that the Million Jobs Plan is maybe even better than the analysis makes it looks, because the Million Jobs Plan was a quantum above that baseline, which itself I found quite a rosy view of the future.
Great, thank you, Michael. Does anybody else want to comment?
Can I just add, and one thing I dwell on a lot at the moment is the Ison analysis, which was done for copper string, which came out with a CBA of 4.54. Now we've just there's some road financing which is effectively being heralded for being announced tomorrow. Now most of those roads will be lucky if they get to 1.2. A 1.3 is a good road from a CBA. Now even if they got copper string wrong by a factor of 2, so it's half that.
Simon, is it worth explaining what copper string is to those who don't know?
Sorry, so copper string is the idea of effectively a 1,100 kilometre electricity transmission line that connects Mount Isa with Townsville, which Mount Isa is at the heart of the Northwest Minerals Province, which is one of the most productive minerals provinces today and into the future in the world, particularly for many of the critical minerals which we all need. So this analysis drove, and the reason it got such a high cost benefit analysis was because of the amount of additional work that would be done right across that 1,100 kilometres with much greater access. It's not just cost, it was access to energy, together with the processing, which would be then committed right across from Mount Isa to Townsville. And to me, that gives you a really good, again, you compare that against a traditional baseline for investment, and that really showed where, it's not just the renewable energy by itself, and it's, as Nicki said, it's really that market coupling. We're not just saying that renewable energy is a panacea for everything, but when you start to couple the resources industry with renewable energy, with effectively having centres like Townsville, where you've got an abundant workforce, that's when you really get all of those factors driving the economic results.
Excellent, thank you, Simon. The next question is directed at Nicki. It is regarding renewable energy industrial precincts. What have the reactions of state governments been in establishing these, in New South Wales and Queensland in particular?
I'll leave Simon perhaps to talk about the New South Wales reaction, because he's been doing more there, but certainly in Queensland we have experienced quite a bit of interest. It's about, renewable energy zones is obviously a concept that the AEMO introduced with its ISP, and it's taken a couple of years to go through the and become a term and an idea and a concept that has become part of public policy. It took us about 6 months of advocacy in Queensland to go, to get them to commit to doing 3 renewable energy zones. We just started in the last month, 2 months, on renewable energy industrial precincts for Queensland. I'm hopeful that we might get an announcement pre-election that indicates a pilot or heading in the right direction. But I think it'll probably take a few more months of advocacy to get this concept really embedded in the bureaucracy and within ministerial offices. And I think that's the idea of the report that Michael and I have done. Like, lots of people, Energy Estate and many others, are talking about the idea of these industrial precincts, but we haven't had a language to use, a shared language, and we haven't had an agreed policy framework. So we've been talking in multiple different ways, and what Michael and I and Visiting and WWF hope is that by putting this policy paper out, we can start to coalesce a lot of industry focus around these and really get some state government traction pretty quickly. Also some industry traction very quickly as well.
So, I mean, I'm, as everyone who knows me, I'm pretty passionate at the quietest of times. I'm extraordinarily passionate about Gladstone. I'm a little bit in love with the place. and Central Queensland Power, which is our joint venture with RES to develop 2 gigawatts plus of wind, solar and storage around Central Queensland, is rooted around what we were calling the Central Queensland Industrial Park, which we have been promoting from a grassroots level. This was actually the Mayor and Glenn Butcher, who's now the Minister for Manufacturing and Regions. They were the ones who said, look, if you're going to do this, how do you support the industry, as well as working closely with Rio? So in Queensland, it's been really strong support for the concept from people like the Coordinator General, and now work that BZE and WWF are doing, supporting right throughout the other industry, the other ministries. It's not just all around Gladstone. There are some obvious precincts close to Townsville. Abbott Point, which everyone will find the symmetry of having a renewable energy precinct at Abbott Point. I'm sure we'll all find that quite delightful. There is the land sitting there out in the Bowen Estate, which was reserved for industry, not just as a sheltering place for coal. So I'm very enthused around what's going on at Gladstone in a New South Wales context. Minister Keane and his department have been very supportive, but also the regional growth team and what they've done with special activation precincts. And again, we're spending billions of dollars on inland rail. If we're going to put this inland rail in, which we're doing, what we want to do is use that in parks, in Wagga, in Moree, and to effectively facilitate manufacturing being brought into those new precincts.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon. The next question is anonymous. It's for Nicki Ison. It says, given food processing is a big industry, high cost to relocate, and a big employer in Oz, and located in cities and regions, how do we get hydrogen to these factories for high-grade heating to displace gas?
So I just actually typed a bit of a response to that one, but I think perhaps Michael can weigh in a bit as well, based on the electrifying industry report that the BZE did and Michael led. But if I go back to that graph of gas use, if you look at the gas use in the food processing industry, it's mostly low temperature gas heat that it's used for. Less than 150 degrees and a little bit higher than that. There are really good existing technologies like industrial heat pumps that can electrify heating processes now in ways that will pay for themselves within a year to 3 years. Is this the analysis we're seeing out of some feasibility studies run by the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity? So really, hydrogen should be thought of as for those places and processes that you can't easily electrify. And food processing is a sector that we should be really targeting for electrification. And in fact, that's a focus of one of our stimulus measures at WWF, this idea of modernising manufacturing through electrification and energy efficiency measures.
Boringly, totally aligned with Nicki on that answer. Yeah, we should electrify first. Hydrogen has some great uses, but you always pay an energy penalty creating renewable hydrogen of, say, 30% of the energy in the conversion to hydrogen. So, and it's easier to move electricity around. We already do it, obviously, than hydrogen. So electrifying should be our first solution that we reach for. And yeah, as Nicki said, great payback periods for doing it. The problem we've got is that although heat pumps, for example, can produce the temperatures that most food manufacturers need, low temperature steam, hot water, we don't have a supply chain in heat pumps. We don't have the suppliers, the people who can maintain them. We don't have the consultants who are likely to recommend a heat pump. The status quo is all about gas boilers, and there's a lot of investment in that status quo. So that's an area where we need government sort of impetus and funding and encouragement to create that supply chain.
Let's not forget our biofuture. Again, when we look at food, biomass and biogas, and again, proven technology, proven all around the world in food manufacturing, and regional. And from a jobs point of view, the numbers of jobs, when you look at Germany that are created in biogas, very, very significant player. So as well as heat pumps, I think we can't ignore biofuture as well.
Yeah, I agree, and I would also add solar thermal as an potential application as well.
Thank you. Our next question, and it might be the last one because we don't have that much time left. It is from Frida Ehrlich, and please forgive my pronunciation. It's directed at Simon Currie, but it's open to the whole panel. Could you please expand on what the right environment and support from the government is that we need, and whether we are going to get it in this budget? Which seems like $1 million question, but I'll just unmute myself.
So I think Nicki did a really good job of outlining what are what we need in terms of the precincts. In terms of manufacturing, we need those precincts, and we need the hubs. When you look overseas and you look at some of the most successful manufacturing precincts, you look around places like Finland, you look around places like Japan, some of the parts of Germany. They are ecosystems where heat is shared, where infrastructure is shared, where you have those joint training programs. And I think, I've been very encouraged the last few weeks. This has been a major shift to me for this government in terms of how quickly it's gone, okay, we do need to pivot, and the work that BZE did. And I didn't actually expect, and Michael probably seconded this, that there'd necessarily be so much support for the concepts that BZE has been putting in front of the PMO and others. And I think that's really encouraging. But we do need something like the mandates. We need that kick-starting to get people across. People like Mark Chilcott, Energy Renaissance, need something to drive them. They've got the technology, they've got the first runs on the board, and now they just need that push to it. And I think rather than effectively just hand money or do things like what the DOE did in America and compared with China, what DOE did is did those loan guarantees, but didn't really create the foundations of a market for, let's say, solar thermal, which was probably at the wrong time of its technological growth anyway. I think we can effectively do, in very much the same way Nicki talked about WA and what they're doing out of the CRCs. If we create that mandate, get people across that hurdle, because there's enough orders for the first 2 or 3 years, then we'll see these businesses, get to the scale we need them to get to.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon. Nicki or Michael, do you have any last comments either to that question or in general before we end discussion group for tonight?
I think I'd say 2 things. The first is we've seen real leadership over the last few years, but particularly the last few months from the state governments. I would say every state government is leading a renewable recovery at the moment. I'm hopeful that as state budgets come around that we will see even greater commitments. Sorry, I'll say 3 things. The second is it's been great to see the calls from institutions and business. We, for example, did a joint letter to the Prime Minister with 72 businesses last week, and we are not the only ones to be working with business. So, the real demand in the corporate sector for this renewable recovery is quite exciting. And then at a federal level, I would say that there has been a shift, and we need to make sure that that shift continues in the right direction. There have been some problematic commitments, but there have also been some really good commitments. And then there's been some commitments that could go either way, and it'll be people like us on this call that make sure that those going either way commitments are delivered, in ways that deliver that renewable recovery.
Thank you, Nicki. Michael?
I think that's a great place to end. We're on 7:30, and yeah, I'd just like to thank Nicki and Simon for attending this event.
Likewise, thank you, Nicki, Simon, Michael, and thank you for everybody watching and for all your great questions. I'm sorry, as per usual, we haven't got to them all, but I will be following up in the next few days with a recording and any resources related to what we were talking about. So we'll do our best to answer these questions in that email. So thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.